Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you everyone for taking your afternoon to continue this wonderful conversation around racial equity, specifically during Racial Equity Week. My name is Avik Das, and I'm proud to be the leader of the Justice Advisory Council, JAC, serving under Madam President. Waving to my Justice Advisory Council teammates here as well.
Well represented. Stand up so we can applaud you.
Yeah, so thank you. All right. Thank you to you. Yes. Thank you to those at home that are dialed in for the conversation. Again, the overall theme is how we're talking about equity and justice as colleagues, as co-workers, under the leadership of Madam President, in advancing Cook County government's work in this area. We want to continue to hold this space. Thank you for taking this time. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I wanted to make sure to give you some grounding as to the conversation and this group called the Justice Advisory Council, or JAC. So if you think of us as conveners, space makers, space takers, we do so under the leadership of Cook County Board President, Madam President Toni Preckwinkle. And in doing that, we're looking for how Cook County shows up for those people, our residents, that are closest to being lost to violence, closest to being lost to contact with the criminal legal system, the carceral system, courts, and law enforcement. How do we bring resources closest to the communities most impacted by the harm of violence, by the harm of criminal legal system contact? How do we reduce that reliance? That's the Justice Advisory Council generally, and it's a reflection of our commitment to making sure that we do better in our systems that otherwise have perpetuated historical harms and continue to perpetuate inequities that we want to see improved. So we want to do our part on that front. So the Justice Advisory Council does a lot of policy work, does a lot of grant making to community-based organizations, like we will be hearing from representatives from that as well. We want to be able to make sure we're bringing resources closest to where they're needed. But in order to do that, that's a journey. And why are we talking about the history of this justice work? Well, there might be a history teacher somewhere on this panel. They might bring that up, I don't know. But at the end of the day, history is important if we're going to learn to do better. We could be confined by those choices that we choose not to look at directly, and we want to be able to address that. And I would argue that if you're going to do something as bold as the Justice Advisory Council and use the word justice in your name, you better be willing to face some hard truths and be able to commit to doing better. And I think that's what we're so grateful to be able to work with all of you that are interested in this, but also to work with our partners represented here about that journey from when Madam President started in 2010 onwards. So now I would like to briefly acknowledge our panelists. We have our Cook County Board President, Toni Preckwinkle, joining us today, President since 2010. We have our Cook County Public Defender, Sharon Mitchell, here as well.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Kiran Joshi, our Chief Operating Officer of the Cook County Department of Public Health. And I'm going to slow down here for 1 second to make sure our guest, we're coworkers, all of us here, but our guest, somebody that we're rooting for the work that he represents, Damian Morris, Chief Program Officer of Violence Prevention at Breakthrough Urban Ministries, a community-based organization that we have the privilege to be able to support and learn from. So I just wanted to pause while we have more introductory handouts to be able to hand out for bios. Damian, would you mind just giving us a quick glimpse of what you do day to day in Breakthrough, your sort of background, and then we're going to get into it.
Okay, yes. So as he stated, my name is Damian Morris.
All right, Damian?
Yeah. Oh,
Closer to you?
Gotcha.
There you go.
The teacher.
Yes.
Welcome, Damian.
Yes. So yes, my
There
name
we
is
go.
Damian. I am the Chief Program Officer of Violence Prevention. Through my lived experience, I arrived at Breakthrough Ministries 17 years ago, and I was that individual who was justice impacted, and I was looking for that opportunity. And so when I arrived to Breakthrough, I asked my executive director, now Yolanda Fields, if you give me the opportunity, I promise you that you won't regret it. And so I've been here, been with the organization in various job descriptions and titles, and now I am the Chief Program Officer of Violence Prevention. So I oversee about several departments within violence prevention. So that's street level, outreach, case management, victim advocacy, safe space events, peacekeeping initiatives as well, and then community relations department as well.
So I hope you see from left to right, under the leadership and vision of trying to do equity and trying to do better in justice, we have, Madam President, since 2010 onwards, creating that kind of space and conversation. And then across the board, we have systems of how do we reduce reliance on our justice system, and how do we bring resources closest to the work that Damien is leading. We're going to hear more at the end about some resources that might also include seeing Damien featured, WTTW Peacekeepers, First-Hand Accounts. One of the documentaries is led by Damien, so we're very grateful that you had the time to be able to join in this conversation. Oh, and 10 minutes at the end, we hope to have room for your questions as well. Team, your questions. Thank you. So with that, Madam President, you came into office in 2010. The local justice system looked a certain way. From your perspective, perhaps it still looks a lot like that, and other ways it doesn't. I was wondering if you could give us a talk about what was going on when you showed up, and what were you kind of focused on?
Sure, thank you very much, Avik. And I'm grateful to all of our JAC folks who are here and for the good work you do, and for the others who have joined us to kind of hear about some of that work. So thank you. So the first thing I should say, I got elected in 2010, but honestly, we couldn't begin any of our policy work for several years. We spent the first 3 years, some of you have heard me say this before, we spent the first 3 years working on our finances. When I came in, we had almost a $500 million gap to close in our budget. 487 million is what I remember. The second year was like 382. So we spent the first 3 years. Whatever I wanted to do in the policy arena got put aside because we had to deal with the finances. And there are two reasons for that. One, your first obligation as an executive is to have a balanced budget and to manage the finances. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you don't do that, that's an albatross around your neck. And nobody will pay any attention to anything else you say because they'll say, you haven't fixed the finances. The finances of the county are a mess. Why are you talking to us about this other stuff? So although I came into office in 2010, it wasn't really until 2013 that we began working on any of our policy initiatives. And the first one we began work on was public safety and bringing the stakeholders together. So 2010, I come into office. 2013, we start our work. But let's talk about what was going on in 2010. On an average daily basis, we had 10,000 people in our jail. Average daily number of people detained in our jail, 10,000. 70% of those who were detained were African American, although African Americans comprised about 20% of the population of the county. So I always say our jails in this country are at the intersection of racism and poverty. We had for quite some time this notion that we should just lock as many people up as possible and that would make our streets safe. And we had lots of people in jail, detained in jail. The people in our local jails, very few of them have been convicted of crimes. Almost everybody is accused, right? So they have not been adjudicated as guilty for the crime of which they're accused. But our jails were full of people who were charged with low-level drug offenses, shoplifting, not paying their child support, and they were there because they couldn't pay their cash bonds. So it was clear to me as alderman, it surely became more clear to me when I got this job, that we had some real challenges in public safety and criminal justice that I needed to address. But as I said, honestly, it wasn't something we got to for 3 years because we had to address the financial challenges first.
Thank you, Madam President. So we're looking at Cook County in general is just got a lot of scale. It's any one thing that Cook County does it pretty big on the national level, local level. That's what it is. And here, Madam President, you've just described a jail system that was relied upon so heavily at the intersection of racism and poverty. And in this way, we're looking at mass incarceration here in Cook County. Damien, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of the work that you're doing and how you see what the impacts of mass incarceration is at the community level?
Yes. So the impact of it is really punitive and not restorative, right? I was incarcerated at the age of 17. Wasn't given a second chance, right? Well, wasn't given a chance at that moment because I still was a youth. But the justice system saw fit to punish me for a crime, for a crime that I didn't commit at that time, right? And so it left no chance for me to restore myself at that moment, right? It wasn't no system where I can be diverted to give myself a chance to redeem myself, right? And so just fast forward, now when we're thinking about this no cash bail, right, it also allows those who can't afford it to at least allow their public defender or their lawyer to make a case for them to be back into society, right, with a plan as well if it's provided, right? And so I look at that as, it needs improvement as well, but I think that we're on the right track, right, to allow the public defender or the lawyer to state a stronger case for the release of an individual, and then also give that individual a chance to redeem himself and be restored as well. So.
Thank you. Damien, I want to highlight one, I always appreciate how you share your personal experience, and thank you for sharing that with us. I also want to point out that here we are at scale, but we're working with individual humans that have impact. And you're sharing that impact, which is fantastic. I'm also pointing out that you really emphasize the idea of an opportunity to be redeemed, to do better. And I think so much of equity is about access to opportunity. And how are we showing up, giving opportunities to those who are otherwise systematically shut out? And in that way, I was wondering, Public Defender Mitchell, you have been a long-time champion and advocate on multiple fronts before you wore the public defender hat. But I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your office, what you're doing, what brought you to the work, and sort of how are the courts doing when it comes to addressing mass incarceration?
Well, thank you so much, Avik, for having me here today. I'm a bit distracted because I'm trying to figure out what I was doing with my face in that picture over there. But with that said, this is a time.
I think you were assessing
I guess, I don't know.
in Cook County, and you were trying to understand. Go ahead.
Listen, the unfortunate truth of the criminal legal system is the vast majority of people in the system who are accused of offenses are poor, right? It is with that backdrop that the Public Defender's Office of Cook County represents the vast majority of people in the system. Probably over 85% of people who are accused of offenses in Cook County are represented by an attorney from our office. And I think that we have, quite frankly, a dual responsibility, first off, to provide the best representation that we can for those individuals who we are blessed to represent. And I'm not just saying this because the president's next to me. The president has been a strong advocate of both criminal justice reform, but our office as well. Because quite frankly, no reforms matter. They're just pieces of paper or words on a piece of paper if you don't actually have somebody that can fight for your rights. So the growth of our office, I think, has been monumental to the fight for reform. But not only are we providing the best representation that we can, but that we can take the collective message, collective narrative, data, stories, and perspective of our clients that we see on a day-to-day basis and use that power and that insight to affect the environment for which our clients will come into on day 2 and day 3 and day 4. The system will always, unfortunately, or looks like it will always exist. Our responsibility has really been around both providing its best strong representation, but also taking that experience and trying to change the system for the better. And there are lots of broken pieces within the criminal legal system, but certainly mass incarceration and the overuse of pretrial incarceration was one of the biggest things that stood out to me, both when I was a line public defender, working at 26 in California, or at 51st in Wentworth, or Belmont and Western, and now as I look as a leader in the office. The reality of the situation is that we put a price tag on the presumption of innocence, and that we, as a matter of policy, forcefully extracted tens of millions of dollars out of mainly black and brown women's pockets. Because it's not accused people who are paying those bonds or failing to pay those bonds. It was the mothers, and it was the grandmothers, and it was the churches, and there
the
was communities
girlfriends.
and the girlfriends
Thank you.
that were forced, right, to decide between, do I pay for my loved one's freedom or do I pay the rent, right? So talking about history, we like to talk about the idea of buying one's freedom as something that was in the past. I would argue that past was 2023, right? So I'm so happy that we at the Public Defender's Office get the opportunity to continue to fight for a better system. And there are lots of problems with the current system, right? We want to constantly make changes, but crystal balls did not come with the Pretrial Fairness Act, right? But it does give us an opportunity, right, to make better decisions about what happens to a person before they go to trial. The second most important decision, the first most important decision in a criminal case is innocence or guilt. But the second most important is what happens to the person during the pendency of that case. We know that people who are locked up are far more likely to plead guilty and far more likely to serve a longer sentence than similarly situated people that have the same thing going on, but they are out. So we can't talk about mass incarceration. We can't talk about wrongful convictions. We can't talk about all of the errors that we don't like in the criminal legal system without talking about the explosion of pretrial incarceration. Incarceration that's gone up 400% nationally since 1970, right? So our hope is with this new system that we create better decision-making, a better decision-making process for what happens to a person when they return to court, when they come to court for the first time. There'll be different sides. The prosecutor may have a view, the defense attorney might have a view, but I will argue that we will all agree that using money as the main factor in determining whether somebody should go to trial, money is the main factor of determining what happens to a person or whether they go to jail or not, was a broken model. And that just determining whether somebody had a rich aunt or not was not the way we should be deciding these really important decisions. So I'm really glad I got invited here to talk about this situation, and I'm totally not nervous sitting right next to my boss.
Thank you, thank you. So here you have a particular vision of where the criminal legal system, our courts, still must do better, have areas of broken functions and processes that need to be addressed, and you come to those challenges with sets of values to do better by our communities. I'm acknowledging that there is something that I witnessed, that coming out of a pandemic, there's a recognition that the vulnerable communities heading into the pandemic were that much more impacted. Yep. And if you have a criminal legal system that criminalizes behavior health, mental health needs, physical health care, and those kinds of things, in a world where we have a public health emergency, we're going to need to be able to challenge those systems to make sure that we're not just criminalizing the needs of human beings wherever they are within our jails or out of it. In that way, I'm so grateful that we have a strong partner in Cook County Health and Cook County Department of Public Health to be able to speak to that. And Dr. Joshi, would you mind sharing from the public health perspective, how is mass incarceration and the work to be able to do better and reduce our reliance on incarceration as a way to address health? How does that look from your
Thanks
perspective?
so much, Avik. I think that was a really perfect segue that you made, and I'm going to talk really close to the microphone because I'm afraid the president is going to call me out if I don't. So in public health, we really think about our work as being centered on addressing health inequities. What is that? It's this fancy public health term for what are essentially unjust preventable differences in health outcomes, right? They're unjust and they're preventable. So it should come as no surprise to this group that the public health literature on this is very clear in that mass incarceration is a major driver of health inequities. People in correctional facilities face many significant health challenges, and I want to be clear that is through no fault of theirs. These are societal problems that really require societal solutions. And to the extent that we're pursuing this approach of decarceration, I think it's really going to have profound public health impacts. And by virtue of pursuing that, I would say, Madam President, you are really a champion for public health. And I would include all of you in the Justice Advisory Council there as well. So getting to specifics about some of these health outcomes I mentioned, people with addiction and serious mental illness are gravely overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So 16% of men and 31% of women in jail have a serious psychiatric condition. That's as compared to 5% in the general population. Half of the individuals in jails or prisons experience problems related to drug or alcohol use. That's way higher than the baseline. And where I think some of these structural impacts that I mentioned really can be highlighted is if you think about this idea that they're not limited to the individuals that are incarcerated. There's this idea of spillover that affects families and communities. So if you look at national data at the county level, they demonstrate that for every 1% increase in the rate of mass incarceration in a given county, you see a 15% increase in the individuals reporting poor mental health. That's not the people that are incarcerated. Those are the people that are out there in the community. Now, listen, I'm a public health guy, I'm a science guy, and so I'm gonna make all these nerdy sort of, qualifications about the limitations of the data, but it's hard to argue that there isn't something there. And I think this becomes much more apparent when we talk about infectious diseases like COVID, right? So it's pretty apparent that carceral settings can act as reservoirs and even amplifiers for infectious diseases, including things like tuberculosis. As a medical student, I was taught to ask about carceral history when taking a history about patients in whom we suspected tuberculosis because of the high rates there. So in addition to the moral imperative that I think is very clear, there are very practical reasons that we must ensure very high quality care is delivered to individuals in the carceral system. So I think we're really fortunate here in Cook County in that Cook County Health has an arm called CIRMAC Health Services that is doing this incredibly challenging work. So I want to give a huge shout out to Manny Estrada and Priscilla Augustin, the medical director there, that do phenomenal work every day under really difficult circumstances. So I know there's going to be opportunity to speak to some of those issues further on in the conversation, so I'll yield back to you, Avik. Thanks.
Well, thank you. So we've set a table in our journey, in our historical look back, as to sort of the standing specter of mass incarceration at the scale of Cook County, the idea that for over a decade we've been confronting those inequities and trying to see how we can do better. And in that way, in this next question, it's really to you, Madam President, and to Public Defender Mitchell, how is it that we're doing reform now? What are the kinds of strides we made from when you stepped in to where we are today? How's it looking?
Okay, so the good people in JAC have given me a list of things that have happened since 2013. Okay, so remember, I spent the first 3 years trying to get the finances in order. As soon as we got that done, we started on our public policy agenda, and the first item on the public policy agenda is public safety and criminal justice reform. And I just want to thank Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation, who supported that work initially, and acknowledged the help that we got from Justice Ann Burke. Ann Burke was on the Supreme Court at the time. And as I looked at revitalizing what at the time was called the Judicial Advisory Council. We changed it to Justice. I said, who can I find out there who will give us some gravitas as we try to meet these challenges in criminal justice reform? And I went to Ann Burke. And I went to Ann Burke because Ann Burke had been part of the Catholic Church's inquiry into the sexual abuse of young people. And she and her co-chair, who I can't remember the name of, I'm sorry, after considerable research and investigation, did a report which they gave to the cardinals, and the cardinals shelved it. And Ann Burke went around the country and was on television talking about how she'd done this work and the cardinals had not followed up, implemented any of the suggestions that were made, calling them out. So I figured anybody who was prepared to call out the Catholic Church might be willing to be an advocate with us for criminal justice reform. And I have to say, I'm not sure we could have done this without her, because having a Supreme Court justice put their good housekeeping seal of approval on the work we were doing was just immensely helpful. So, I mean, you ought to credit where credit is due. We had the right idea, we're trying to do the right thing, but we needed third-party affirmers, and she was our best third-party affirmer. So, remind me, when did we get the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge First Award? Do you remember?
Was that 2015? Yeah.
Planning grant, and then I think the term began in earnest late 2016, early 2017.
Okay, so 2013 we start this work. I talked to Justice Burke. She agrees to work with us. We weren't getting a lot of headway with the other stakeholders. So Ann Burke suggested that I write a letter to the Supreme Court and ask them for their assistance, because they're responsible for the courts in the state of Illinois. They were not happy because I sent the letter to them, and I also released it to the press at the same time. So the Supreme Court decided that they would work with us and encouraged the stakeholders in the public safety arena to get together, to collaborate, to try to address some of the challenges in the Circuit Court of Cook County. So, again, we would have been working on this, but it would have been a much harder slog without Ann Burke's help and support. 2015, we get this MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge Grant. These are grants that they administer, that they invest in all across the country, so we're one of the locations for these grants. And it says it's aimed at reducing rates of incarceration, detention, and addressing racial disparities. So here are some of the things we did. First of all, the JEC went around on basically listening tours around the south and west sides of the city and in the south suburbs, where most of the people who are in our jail come from, to kind of hear what the concerns of the community were. We put in place an automated court reminder system. Now, I get reminders on text messages on my cell phone when I have doctor's appointments, but we were not reminding people to go to court. And ironically, when we started sending automatic reminders to people on their cell phones about their court dates, more of them showed up. So, what a surprise, right? So we started prompting people to come to court because we wanted to improve the rate of showing up. We developed diversion programs, including SEED, which stands for Supporting Employment and Educational Development for Young People, so that if they participated in these programs, they could have the charges dropped against them and their records were expunged. So we were investing in diversion programs. And of course, we're putting money into violence prevention work, initially kind of modest sums and now pretty considerable sums in violence prevention work. So about 400 people are participating in the SEED program, but we've supported lots of other community-based programs that do diversion work. So again, we started not just with our own commitment, but foundation support from the Trust and MacArthur Foundation, and support from a justice on the Supreme Court. And that made our work challenging as it was, considerably easier than it might have been without those third-party affirmers and without the kind of gravity that goes with a Supreme Court justice working with you and the Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation behind you. So. You want me to go on? Okay. So that's the beginnings. In 2014, we did a study of bond court practices to better understand how the pretrial system was working. In 2017, so this is 4 years after we started the work, regular meetings with stakeholders, initially monthly. The chief judge of the circuit court basically issued a general order that said that liberty should be the default and not detention. So there was a dramatic reduction on reliance on cash bonds. But again, this is after 4 years of work, okay? Bringing everybody together on a regular basis, kind of talking through some of the challenges we faced, looking at what's happening in bond court. That reform significantly limited the use of money bonds. And those who got bond had lower bail amounts than previously had been the case. So our work on bail reform, I think, was remarkably successful. We didn't eliminate cash bond, but we saw a dramatic increase in the utilization of cash bond, and there was no measurable increase in crime following this. I mean, the narrative is if more people have liberty rather than detention, there'll be some spike in crime. That isn't what happened. And $31 million in bond costs were avoided by families and their the defendants and their families. To the point that the public defender made, cash bond extracts wealth from black and brown neighborhoods. That's what it does, okay? And I think the work we did unquestionably paved the way for the Pretrial Fairness Act, which you heard was passed in 2021 and implemented in 2023 after a suit was brought by downstate state's attorneys challenging the constitutionality of the Pretrial Fairness Act, and the state Supreme Court ruled that it was in fact constitutional, and in the fall, September of 2023, it began to be implemented. So we've got a public safety system that's based, in fact, on not the wealth that you have, not just the size of your wallet, but whether you're a risk to the community, to yourself, or a risk of flight. And I think that gives us a criminal justice system that's much more fair to all the people who are enmeshed in it. And again, despite fewer people being locked up, somebody help me, I know the jail population is less than 6,000 still?
It is less than 6,000 as of today.
Okay, so it was 10,000 in 2010. It's been a 40% reduction. It's been ticking upward lately, which concerns me, and we'll have to look at that. But a lot fewer people in our jail. We've seen crime go down since the pandemic, dramatic reductions across the country, not just here. But in 2025, there's been a 35% decline in gun homicides since this time last year. So just really dramatic decreases, particularly in violent crime. So.
Thank you, thank you. Public Defender Mitchell, even prior to being public defender, you were paving the road to the Pretrial Fairness Act. And I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate upon, okay, we had the reform happened, Cook County was sort of the leading edge of the work, and now here we are sort of nationally targeted for that reform that, as Madam President says, is accompanied with reductions in crime and a proof of effectiveness. So, not that, maybe you have an opinion on this,
No.
Public Defender Mitchell, but if you could share a little bit more about, you know, why was this reform so important and how is it working for people and communities?
It's a great question. So there's a 2017 study done by the sheriff that found that bond hearings, these are the hearings to determine what will happen to a person before they go to trial, that they were taking 37 seconds before a decision was made. I was a public defender. Then left the public defender's office to go work in policy. And I would work on things like, I hate the word bail reform, but bail reform, really ending money bond, reducing pretrial incarceration. And part of the work was taking people into court who weren't lawyers, they weren't prosecutors or defense attorneys, They were just regular folks, and I would take them to 26 in California and let them hear, see, feel how bond court looked. And you had, quite frankly, a mainly white workforce who did not look or talk or sound like the accused person. You had people using really big words, very technical terms, talking fast, and you had people throwing around dollar amounts that determined where that person would sleep at night. It was hard to not describe it as a slave auction. I mean, it sounded just the same. Arguments about dollars over black and brown bodies. And these really important decisions, right? Just based upon whether somebody happened to have a rich auntie. Or not even a rich auntie, because half of the bonds were $500 and $1,000. And thinking about how that made decisions about what would happen to a person, and then thinking about if that bond got met, what sacrifices that family had to take on to make that bond. It was an incredibly awful system for a number of reasons. So I'm really glad that we had partners that decided that system was broken and wanted to change it. Now, the current system is not perfect. There's no doubt about it. But making those decisions based upon other factors instead of the access to money a person has created a far better system. And the Pretrial Fairness Act was not just about ending money bond, it was about creating a real system for making these incredibly important decisions. If you ever seen a picture of an iceberg where a little bit of the tip is above the water and the majority of the iceberg is under the water, that is like the Pretrial Fairness Act, right? The tip is just ending the use of money, but the gravamen of it is creating a real decision-making process of what happens to a person. So in all that, I forgot your question.
No. I actually think you've really explained sort of how critical a feature this is, because it creates space for other work to happen. If people, as Damien had described, are held in jail, then there's opportunities to engage services and supports that are denied. And in a world where we've now removed money as the barrier, but in fact are looking at needs and risk and trying to create a much more deliberative space, there's an opportunity, we hope, for space from the courtrooms to our communities for work to be done. And in that way, go ahead.
I just remember what I was going to say.
Yes, please, go for it.
And when we're talking to people who kind of have our same political beliefs, I think that it's easy to make this argument, okay, mass incarceration is bad, right? But I think we also have to acknowledge the fact that there are people in our communities that are scared, and they're scared about crime, and the numbers suggest what they suggest, and they are right, but they have those fears. And I think the key thing for us is to really have this conversation about how mass incarceration made us far less safe. That the forceful extraction of dollars out of communities made us less safe, right? That removing a person's ability to go to school, get an education, connect with their family, increase the criminogenic factors that forced or allowed or pushed people into things that we don't like. So there is an argument about fairness and making good decisions, but there's also this very key safety position, right? That we're in a safer place when we make better decisions about incarceration. And it's funny that you hear the same people that are talking about how this system is so bad in 2021 talked about how these changes to the Pretrial Fairness Act, the changes that the Pretrial Fairness Act presented, would create the purge. That the streets would run red with blood, and that nobody would come to court, and that the criminal legal system would be it'd be nothing. And these are not just the fringe, right? These are people who the taxpayers pay to make really important decisions about what should happen in the criminal legal system. So the question we have to ask ourselves, and I still haven't answered it in my head, I ask this all the time, maybe I'm a little crazy, is were those people either intentionally lying to us for power, or were they so ignorant they had no idea what was happening with our system? And I'm not sure which. But what I do know is the changes that we've made have made our communities safer. That's what I was going to say. I remember now.
Thank you, Public Defender Mitchell. So as we bring ourselves to the final round of questions and open up to the floor, I really want to acknowledge that if we are reducing reliance on the criminal legal system, we are attempting to increase our reliance on great work in our communities from a lens of public health. How do we center the person and not the crime in bringing services to our communities most in need? And in that way, I'm very proud that the Justice Advisory Council, in partnership with the public health system, under the leadership of Madam President, are looking to make investments in community-based organizations such as Breakthrough and what Damien leads. And in this way, what I was wondering, Damien, and then ending with Dr. Joshi, you're a leader in this violence prevention field. Could you dig in a little further about what is CVI, or Community Violence Intervention, something that we, alongside the Government Alliance for Safe Communities at the state and the city, have poured in millions to be able to support, and very recently $20 million in community violence intervention grants has come from the Justice Advisory Council into organizations such as Breakthrough, along with $5 million for survivors of gun violence and providing support. Damien, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about this language called CVI, Community Violence Intervention?
Yes. So CVI has evolved from the Cure Violence model, and so it's a holistic network of about 24 to 25 organizations throughout the city. These organizations provide services, but also do street-level outreach throughout about 30 communities within the city, right, of Chicago. Through this holistic approach, we really have men and women who have been trained as professionals. So when we're talking about your lived experience, we want to merge that with professionalism as well. And so they go through 144 hours of professionalism, touching on topics of such as mediations, street-level intervention, victim advocacy, case management, things of that nature, right? And so with this investment, you all are investing in those who have that lived experience, but we also know that there's a behavioral health component to it as well. So when we think about our men and women who have that lived experience, they are really going into a community, and they're also being responsible for carrying on that secondary trauma while also putting their life on the line to save others as well. And so we're really focusing on that behavioral health aspect, whether it's internally or externally, for our men and women who are leading this cause, right? And so we're not just thinking about our participants, but we're also thinking about our staff as well. And so CVI, once again, we're focusing on street-level intervention, victim advocacy, case management, safe space events. And we really use these pillars right here as a strategy, right? We want to engage with the high-risk men and women who are perpetrators, could be perpetrators of gun violence or victims of gun violence, and so we want to prevent re-victimization. Community violence intervention goes deep. It's unpredictable, so every day it changes, right? It's not planned like I can leave out as a chief program officer and plan my day. It doesn't go as planned, never have, and I've been doing this work since 2017 officially, right? But how do we support those who are doing the work? And so with this investment, this is what we're talking about. When you invest in others and in their potential, you're giving them that opportunity to succeed.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah. So you've just described relationships, Courageous relationships, that's what you're investing. This isn't something you can order off Amazon Prime. That in fact you require patience and courage to be able to do that, and it could be very dynamic. You've described a situation of bringing healing right to the front lines of communities that might be dealing with all sorts of challenges and trauma. This is public health in action, a model in CVI. And with that, Dr. Joshi, I mentioned that we've been partners in trying to make sure that we lead from a public health approach. What is your view on sort of where are we going with our direct services, our approach from your angle? Yes.
Thanks so much, Avik. So under the president's leadership and Dr. Makaitis is the CEO of the health system, we've made investments in healing, such as Healing Hurt People Chicago. So this is a clinical and advocacy program that some of you may be familiar with that essentially operates out of the Stroger trauma unit. It's been around for many years. It's been grant funded and sort of precarious for many years. And that program has recently been fully funded by the health system and is going to be wrapped into and integrated into a so-called behavioral health service line. And I know how pleased that my dear friend Carol Reese, who passed away earlier this year and sort of really conceptualized and led that program for many years, would be so happy about that.
All right, so tell us what that program is.
Sure.
I know, but I'm not sure everybody does.
Sure. So essentially, this is a group of social workers and lay people that work with individuals who have experienced physical trauma and violence, and provides, thank you, and who provides crisis intervention, mental health, medical advocacy, and all kinds of other supports.
So the people who come into the emergency room who've been shot, okay, victims of violence, are approached by the Helping Hurt People, because once you've been shot, the likelihood you're going to be shot again is pretty high, right? So the point is to try to intervene at the point in which they're in the emergency room and try to get them into comprehensive, holistic care so they're not on the same path that's going to lead them back to the emergency.
Thank you, Madam President. The Cook County Health Office of Behavioral Health has also invested $44 million through their Stronger Together initiative. They're funding a number of activities, including treatment and recovery, so direct behavioral health services across Cook County, including the city of Chicago. We have a similar initiative called Building Healthier Communities in alignment with the President's policy roadmap, and have invested $21.5 million in suburban Cook County specifically. We're really excited because some of that work has sort of naturally led us to explore potential partnerships with JAC, focusing on interrupting the school to prison pipeline by implementing and supporting things like restorative practices. So, there's this idea borne out in data that Black and brown children are much more likely to be subjected to all kinds of disciplinary practices, suspension, expulsion, and so forth. So the idea of restorative practices is to try to change that organizational culture to something that is hopefully more productive and less likely to end up with a child ending up in jail. Thanks.
Thank you. So we are approaching our floor opening questions, but in doing so, mindful of the time, I was wondering if I might ask Madam President if you might share sort of where you think we're at and where you would like to see us in terms of our commitments and moving forward.
Well, again, I want to thank all the folks from the Justice Advisory Council who are here for your good work. As I said, as we looked at our possible public policy initiatives, we started with criminal justice reform. So, and starting there reflects my priorities. That was, in my view, that was the most important place for us to begin. Now, part of that is 60% of our budget is healthcare, and another 15-20% is public safety. So those are the two big buckets that our resources are invested in. This is an interesting moment. I mean, Chicago's under assault by the President of the United States, who refers to his work in Chicago as a blitz. Now that's a term that you use in war. So I don't think it's, as I said, unfair to say that we're under assault. And of course, our undocumented residents are the point of the spear here in terms of what they say they're doing. But he's attacking Chicago more broadly. And in particular, he's talking about, you know, the fact that we don't have any cash bond. I read something on my phone this morning about the efforts of the Justice Department to end our ban on assault rifles. So all of the work we're doing in kind of the public safety criminal justice arena is under attack by the President of the United States. So this is a challenging moment for us. We're going to have to figure out what we can do ourselves and what we can do together. I just want to say I'm very grateful for the partnership with the state of Illinois and the mayor. Government Alliance for Safe Communities, right?
That's correct.
GASC. So you should know that these three entities, the state, the county, and the city, have been collaborating about how we spend our violence prevention resources to reduce overlap and duplication and make the most of the resources that we have. So what I'm really encouraged about is the level of cooperation and collaboration, which hasn't always existed, I have to be honest, between the city, the county, and the state around public safety and criminal justice reform. And we're going to have to strengthen those bonds and our level of collaboration as the external environment, as the federal assaults continue.
Thank you, Madam President. Everyone, if you could just join me in thanking our panelists for the conversation. In the last few minutes, maybe we have one or two questions. Please, Kale.
Hi, I just want to say thank you again. This has been such an informative panel discussion. Part of being a public servant, I feel like we are ambassadors for our community. And I would like to know from the information that's been shared, you know, Madam President, you talked about how people are afraid and all of Chicago is essentially under attack. What can we tell our friends and our neighbors who recognize us as public servants? What hope is there? You know, whether they're facing mental health challenges, just the stress of knowing that we're all under attack, worrying about job security, worrying about their families that are immigrants. You know, what is the best piece of advice? What is the takeaway that you can give us as proud public servants of this county to inform and to possibly provide an element of peace to our neighbors and to our community at large?
So I was reading something the other day, and I can't tell you where it was, about how people deal with stress. And, you know, there are suggestions like, you know, meditation or yoga or, you know, a walk in the woods or whatever. But the suggestion was, one of the ways you can deal with stress is help other people, that you will feel less stressed if you're assisting other people. So I would suggest, first of all, I encourage people to participate in the protests, nonviolent protests. Silence means assent. It's very important for our country to see that there are lots of folks out in the street who don't think that the present course of our national government is the right one. You can support organizations that help our immigrants, like the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICER. They are a good kind of clearinghouse of the organizations that are around in the county that support immigrant communities. I'm sure they're looking for volunteers. And we know that there are people who are kind of out in the communities looking for the presence of ICE and filming what they're doing so that there's a record of it. So there are lots of opportunities, lots of ways that you can be supportive. You can volunteer, and it doesn't have to be that, but you can volunteer, you can give money. And then, you know, so I'm an elected official in democracy. You can work for candidates who believe the same things you do. And we need more people at all levels of government who are prepared to say that this is a pivotal point in our country's history, and those of us who believe that we shouldn't be snatching people off our streets and sending them to gulags in foreign countries, that there shouldn't be an assault on Illinois because we don't have cash bond and we're trying to ban assault weapons. Support candidates who share your values. We've got an election coming up in March. There are lots of people on the ballot, top to bottom, U.S. Senate races, statewide races, state legislative races. Lots of opportunity for you to get involved in those campaigns and work for people you believe in. We can't have a strong democracy unless ordinary people step up and give their time and their money to the candidates they believe in. I'm a teacher, right? We're getting to a point in this country where ordinary people like me, teachers, are having a hard time because it's the rich people. I like JB a lot. He's a billionaire. We can't have government only of billionaires, right? We have, and the only way for that to be the case is that ordinary people have to do the work and contribute money. So it's incumbent, I always say, your first obligation as a citizen is to vote. But that's necessary and not sufficient. You have to support good people in office if you want to be a good citizen. We can't just leave our democracy to the wealthy. We have to work hard ourselves as ordinary people to make our democracy strong, especially in this moment.
Thank you. So with that, recognizing that we're at that moment at the end of our presentation, you'll see a slide of joining the Justice Advisory Council mailing list. That's there. But the next slide is some resources for recommended reading that you may enjoy. I believe our team organizing Racial Equity Week will be sharing these slides to all the registrants. So thank you, everyone, for your time this late hour to be with us in this important conversation. We'll take this hope from this room and out there and continue to fight for justice and equity.
Thank you.
Yes?
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
I have a document.